This is Matt Cohen for Matt Cohen Photo Workshops. This is the third video in the exposure triangle series that I'm working on right now. You should be pretty familiar with this chart that shows, relatively speaking, how the shutter speed, the ISO, and the aperture work together to make an exposure. If you watch the overall one, you will get an idea as to how that works. And then there is a specific video for effects of shutter speed. And this one is the specific video on aperture. And it's very, very basic. Aperture is just the physical size of the opening in the lens that allows the light to pass through the lens and hit the sensor. So we'll zoom in here. You can see physical size of diaphragm. In every lens, there is glass, and the light will pass through the glass onto the sensor. And the aperture is a blade design, and it goes from being relatively big, like a 2.8, and it'll go down to relatively small, like an f/22. And this is how much light is coming through the lens. This can go up 32. I've seen 64 on the high end, and then this goes down to 2.0, 1.4, 1.2, and 1.0. These are pretty rare. You don't see those very much. 1.4 pretty common for like portrait lenses, things made for low light. Anyway, these all have two different functions. They will allow different amounts of light to come in through the lens, and it also affects the depth of field. Since there's not very much creativity involved in the simple size of it and how much light is coming through, we're going to take a look at how aperture controls depth of field, because this is way more important for creativity and planning and thinking about how shoots are going to go. So we're going to focus much more on the depth of field than just the raw amount of light coming through. So this is set up to be 1-to-1, right? So narrow aperture, slow aperture, high number f-stop, right? These things all mean the same thing, and they're talking about this side of the scale, right? So even though f/22 is a big number, it's a slow aperture, a narrow aperture. That's what high number f-stop gets you. And then on the other side, a wide aperture or a fast aperture or a low number f-stop is going to be this side. So that's going to be, wide is talking about how much the lens opens up to let the light in. So that's a wide aperture, a fast aperture, a low number f-stop. The importance of these things, as we're going to look at in terms of depth of field, is that when you're on the wider end this way, you're allowing more light to pass. The other effect that happens when you open up, use a wide aperture, fast aperture, that kind of thing, is that it's going to help isolate your subject and blur out the background. This is also known as shallow depth of field. The opposite of this is over here. If you look at f/22, that's going to restrict the light that's coming in, and everything more or less is going to be in focus, and there's not going to be any separation between your subject and your background. That's called no depth of field, flat. That's not what we're trying to do. As sports photographers, our job is to isolate the action or separate the action from the background. So the action is the important thing. The background thing is the common thing. It's going to be in all of your photos. The reason you're doing this is that you want to illustrate the moments as clearly as possible, because photography is a communication between the photographer and the viewer. Depth of field is a really powerful tool in this communication, because you can help the viewer see things in totally new ways. If they're just watching on TV, they're going to be used to a certain point of view. They're going to be used to a very flat kind of look, because when you're watching on TV, you're supposed to be able to see all of the players and what they're doing. And in photography, you're much more likely to be looking at one or two players, and you don't want them to be the same look as what the background is, because then you're saying this thing that is supposed to be important, I'm making it look unimportant by not setting it off from the background, not being able to separate the important from the common. It's a really, really fundamental tenet of sports photography that you can't just dismiss. It's not true on every picture. There are definitely times when you want the background to be in focus, but you should be starting on the opposite end of that, which is separating the action from the background. Very important to do that. Depth of field is controlled by four things: the aperture, lens length, distance to the subject, and then the subject distance to the background. This is a site. It is called dofsimulator.net. And I just found this actually. It used to be there were depth of field calculators that would show you the numbers, but it wouldn't show you a simulation like we have here. I think this is much more useful. Up here at the top, we have the lens length. So you can slide this forward and back to simulate what it would look like. So this is a 24 millimeter lens, and it shows a woman standing in a field with some mountains in the background. But then if you were to stand in the same place and shoot with a 200 millimeter lens, this is what it would look like. So as I'm sliding this in and out, I don't want you just to look at the relative size of the woman. I want you to look at what's happening also to how the background looks, because as we go all the way out here to 300 millimeters and you look in the background, you can't really see. You can, it's out of focus trees, right? You can tell they're green, but that's really about it. But let's say we were using a different lens, and let's say it was 40 millimeters, and you're looking here and you can see the trees behind her. You can tell that they're trees now, right? It's not just green blobs. And then as we go all the way out to 24, she's exactly the same focus as the background is, right? This is briefly how depth of field works. So the longer lens you're using, the more extreme the depth of field is going to be, where the subject is in really good focus and the background is really out of focus. So we can see how that works here, right? As we're using a longer lens, but leaving everything else the same. That's what that looks like. So let's say we were adjusting, let's say we wanted to still shoot, let's say at 100 millimeters, right? You can see here that the aperture has been 2.8 for the whole time that we've done this. So let's pretend that we were using a 100 f1.4, right? So the background is pretty out of focus, but if we made it a 100 f22, you can see that the background is very in focus, exactly the same focus as the subject is. So if you were on vacation and you wanted to make a picture like this, that would be fine, because you're showing your friend or your partner or whoever it is, and you're showing the background. This is where I was, right? It wouldn't do you any good to go on vacation and just have a bunch of pictures with blurry backgrounds, right? Because this doesn't tell you where you were. It's just, this is a picture of my friend. But the more you stop down, the more you can see how it gets sharper in the background, to the point where there's no difference between how she looks and how the background looks. That's not what we're doing in sports photography, this is much more what we're looking for because, again, it's our job to isolate the action from the background. Pretending that this was action, that's how you would do that. So it's not just lens length and aperture that controls how the depth of field looks. It's also the distance from you to the model, which is on top here, and the distance between the model and the background, which is on the bottom. As it's set up here, the model is 20 feet away from me and the background is 80 feet behind the model. So it's pretty easy at that point to blur out the background if you have a reasonably long lens and a reasonably wide aperture. But let's say that instead of being 20 feet away from the camera and 80 feet away from the background, let's say that the model was 50 feet away from me and 80 feet from the background, right? Look how much more the background is in focus just from changing that, right? So it goes from, 20 something feet away, the background is out of focus. But if you were to move the model further and further away from the camera and closer to what the background is, then you don't have any separation at all. So keeping in mind that distance has such impact on depth of field and how things look, this should explain to you why I'm constantly trying to get as close to what I'm shooting as possible. Because the further away the subject is, it's going to blend into the background. And it really doesn't matter how wide your aperture gets. After a certain point, it just doesn't matter. And it's just going to look bad the whole time. On the bottom here, this is kind of more of a spatial way of looking at this. So you can see as I move, pretending that the model is really close to me, like, stand right here, 10 feet away, right? You get that kind of separation. As I move her towards the background, there is no separation, right? Flat, no depth of field, everything. You're just saying this is as important as this, as important as anything else in the picture. And because we're communicating with the people who are looking at the pictures, this isn't good. So to me, I'm always trying to separate the subject from the background first. If there's a reason not to, then I'll think about that and make a different plan. But in general, right, I'm trying to get to a point where, and I know, right, you can't always be in the situation that you want to be, but this is how I think about setting up a shoot, right? I'm going to figure out where can I be, whether it's on the football sideline or in a baseball batting cage or in the rodeo dirt, right? How can I get closer to my subject than the subject is to the background? Because it gives me that separation, right? If you look at the picture, the bigger picture here, you can see that the woman is in focus and the background is out of focus. That is what we're trying to do. The further she gets away from you, like this is halfway right here, right? There's no separation anymore. It's very, very hard to see any separation there. The further and further and further she gets away from the camera and towards the background, then you're just looking at an iPhone snapshot, right? You're giving away all of the advantage that you have to be able to make the picture look as good as you can. You're just giving it away. I'm not going to do every one of the combinations here. I think it's enough to show you this. Again, dofsimulator.net, and you can plug in all of your own lenses and cameras and the different apertures and the different situations that you might find yourself in as far as how far away the subject is and then how far away the background is behind them. It's really important. And this will show you all of the different ways that you can change all of that. So I highly recommend checking out this site. This set of pictures is going to take a look at the limits of depth of field and what to do when you get stuck. This is, wow, this picture is 13 years old. This is what it looks like with a 400. So I'm at the end line behind the near goal, and I'm shooting basically 115, 20 yards away to the other goal. And you can see here that I was at 400 millimeters and 2.8, so only one lens that could be 400 2.8. And I'm focusing on the wall right here, right? I don't have his face, so I don't need to focus on him. I'm focusing on these faces right here. I'm trying to get a shot of maybe the ball will hit the wall, maybe it'll go right by somebody's face, something like that, right? But the point of this picture and the reason why I don't shoot like this ever again is that if you look at their faces and then you look at the ball boy in the background, right? You can see that it says ball kid on his jersey, just like you can see that it says Amway Global on the Earthquakes jerseys. So this isn't a picture that I'm going to try to make ever again. I just don't shoot like this anymore because the subjects of the picture are 100 yards away from me and the background is only 20 yards behind them, even with a 400 2.8, a lens where in an aperture where you should really, really be able to get as much blur in the background as you want. You just can't do it here because even at 2.8 and even with a long lens like 400, the distances are just working completely against you and you cannot make a picture that has sufficient depth of field. This is another example. So basically the same kind of situation. Once again, I'm focused on the wall. You can see they're basically the same distance away. So these guys are 100 yards away and this goal right here, 120 yards away. I can read everything, right? The logo for the Earthquakes, the word for the Earthquakes, they were advertising to follow them on Facebook. I can see this guy in the background has an Earthquakes jersey on. Look at how these guys' faces are right next to this guy's face, and there's not a compelling case that you should be looking at the players over the security guard, right? Somebody would have to tell you this is where you're supposed to be looking. So yeah, I just, again, don't shoot like this anymore. It's not worth it to me. I don't need more pictures like this. This one 400 and f4, but the aperture at that point doesn't matter. What matters is the distance. So this is a baseball picture. This is another really good example of pictures that I don't really try to make anymore. This is a sliding catch by, at that point, one of the best players in the league, Andrew McCutchen. But I don't know, he is probably 300 feet. I know this wall is 400 feet, so I'm guessing that he's 300 feet away from me. And so 300 feet to here, and then only 100 feet to here. And you can see all of the little repairs that they did when people ran into the wall and cut it up or whatever, rather than replacing the whole thing. They just put patches on it. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see any of this in the picture, right? He's just too small. He's not set off from the background enough, even though he's making a sliding catch and you can see the ball in his glove right at the second that he's making the catch and he's completely off the ground. Here, this doesn't work because the distances don't work. And here's even a worse version of that. You can see literally this is the distance from home plate. So this is 400 feet away. I'm probably another 20 or 30 feet behind home plate. So this is 430 feet away from me. And there's absolutely no difference between where he is hitting into the wall and where the wall is. And this door back here is only like another maybe 10 feet or something like that behind the fence. So there's no separation here, period. If this was a situation where I could get onto the field like I do in rodeo and I could be with a wide lens here shooting like this picture would look really cool, right? There would be separation between him and the background because I would be just a few feet away from him and the background is 10 or 12 feet away beyond that, right? So I would have been able to get a nice 3D, really dramatic kind of looking picture. But when everything that you're shooting is the same distance away, you're not getting any separation whatsoever. There's no difference at all between the subject and the background, and it just looks flat. This is not a good sports photo, even though it's an outfielder jumping almost over his head to try to stop a home run. As you can see, all of these pictures are really old. These are 13 years old. I just don't shoot like this anymore, so I had to go back pretty far into my archive to find pictures that look like this because I've already decided I just don't like shooting like that. So these aren't the pictures that I make anymore. I almost never shoot team roping like this. And I remember why I did it like this. Somebody was working on a website and they needed a picture of both of these guys roping. So, okay, I'll make that picture. This is, again, not how I shoot team roping at all. So this was with 7200. I'm at f3.2. The problem with this picture, and the problem with any team roping picture where you're shooting both the header and the heeler and their horses along with the steer, is that the distances are all wrong. You can't be wide enough to put them completely in the frame, but have a shallow enough depth of field to blur out all this stuff in the background. So every pair team roping picture, when they're stretched out like this, you're just not going to be able to get rid of this kind of stuff in the background. And I just don't like looking at that. This takes me out of looking at the ropers, and it has me looking at ads and logos and a tent. I just don't want to look at this. It's not that my gear isn't up to it. It's not that I'm not a good enough photographer, even in 2011 when I made this picture. The point is, the rules of depth of field mean that I can only open up so much and still get the two cowboys. Like, they're not close to each other and they're not really the same distance away. This guy is definitely closer than this guy is by, I don't know, 5 or 10 feet, something like that. This steer is definitely closer than this. You can tell because it's right in the way, but also he's still in focus. So when you're shooting like this and you're leaving it all of this stuff in focus, you just don't know, the viewer just doesn't know where to look. And again, I just do not shoot like this because there's no way to blur out the background and still be this wide when you're that far away. Like, every single factor of all of this, the aperture that you need to be at to get everything in focus, how wide the lens is, and then just for safety, the distance between you and the subject. And then because of where they are in the arena, the background is very close. So I was not setting myself up for success. This is maybe a tiny little bit better version of this, but this also kind of shows the limits. I'm significantly closer to them here, and they are a little bit further away from the background. I'm at 102 millimeters with a 70-200, 2.8 aperture. So I do have both of the riders, both of the horses, and the steer. This is all in focus. The background is more out of focus than it was in the previous picture, but it's not good enough. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm just going to constantly be shooting like this, because the background is going to be as prominent in all of these pictures as the subject is, and I'm failing to separate them. That's a failure to me, and I'm not going to, like, if somebody says go somewhere and make this picture, okay, I'll go make that picture if it's really important to do it. But I'm not going to set up somewhere for a 4 hour slack and just make the same picture over and over and over again, because it just doesn't look good enough. This is how I'm more likely to shoot team roping. And so this kind of shows you a different look at the depth of field. So still with 70 to 200, still at 2.8, but because I let them get much closer to me, and I'm focused on this guy. He's in focus. He's not in focus because he's significantly closer to me, and I'm at 2.8, and they're both closer to me than the background is. There's enough depth of field that the background is soft. You can still see what's happening back there. You can still see their people, but you can't recognize anybody. You can't read their t-shirts, right? So that is separation. So this picture, if you look at it as a whole, is layered. You have the guy that's in focus, and then you have the cowboy that's out of focus who's closer to you, and then you have all the fans in the background that are out of focus because they're further away. I'm much more likely to make a picture that looks like this because of that depth, because I'm separating things, and it doesn't matter to me that only one of the cowboys is in focus. People change team roping partners all the time. People are sponsored. The header and the heeler are sponsored by different rope companies. I've long since decided that pair pictures of team ropers aren't worth the time that it takes to make them. So I just don't do that anymore. It doesn't mean that you have to do it, but you have to understand that when you are shooting that and you have a rope that's out 30 feet or something like that, you're going to have a lot of the background coming in that just doesn't look good. This is an overhead view of what it looks like at Red Bluff. And I pulled this because I kind of wanted to show one of the ways that I counteract the pair team roping pictures. So here is the box right here. So the header is going to come out and throw, and then he's going to kind of pull this way. The heeler is going to come around and throw, right? So if I put myself somewhere over here, they're both going to end up relatively close to me, and I'm going to have my shot at shooting them at some point. And look how far the background is away at that point. So instead of like being right here and shooting this way, let's clear this up a little bit. So in the picture that we were just looking at, maybe I'm kneeling right here and I'm shooting back this way. These guys are coming out of the box. So maybe it's like 50 feet from me to them, and it's only 10 feet from them to the background, right? That's why there was no depth of field in pictures like this, right? Just too far away from me and too close to the background. You just don't get that kind of separation. It looks two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional. So that's how I plan for something like that. This is the way I'm looking at the distances. So they're coming out and coming around like this, right? Let's say I'm set up here and I wait for them to come past me a little bit, and I'm shooting back this way. This right here is only like 30 feet or something like that. So me to the subject is 30 feet. From the subject to the background is 200 feet. So I'm going to be able to get a lot of isolation there just because of those distances involved. So I would rather make a shot like that where I have a subject that's taking up the frame and, really having a high impact, but also having the background be more out of focus, right? So I'm not getting any impact here and the background isn't out of focus. But when I change the math around and get closer to what I'm shooting and leave the background further away, I can do something like this, right? So this is, again, 70 to 200. This is at 2.8 still, right? But because it is 30 feet from me to here and 200 feet from him back here, look at how 3D all of this looks, right? Pops right out of the page. You can even see here's his header right here. This is out of focus because he's significantly closer, right? The leg of the horse significantly closer there. This one I would crop probably to here or something like that, but you could leave it this way just to show the 3D nature of this picture. So in this situation, the lens that I'm using and the aperture that I'm using and the distances involved all come together to make this look 3D, to make the subject very separated from the background. Whereas this picture that was taken at the same arena just doesn't have any of that whatsoever. There are going to be times where you're going to want to shoot both team ropers. Don't let me stop you, right? But I think we can look at this picture and we can look at the depth in this picture and say this one's nicer. And then we can look at this one and say this one's much nicer just because of the distances involved and the again 3D. This is the flip side of the bad examples of depth of field. These are really extreme examples of depth of field. This isn't the kind of thing that you're going to really be able to get out in the arena. These are certainly more behind the scenes kind of pictures just because of how close you really need to get. It's not safe to get action pictures like this. So this is a picture of Chris Harris, a bareback rider, putting tape on his arm. This was 24 1.4. I'm so close here. This is like the minimum focusing distance. I'm probably 8 inches away from his hands in this case. So even though it's a wide angle lens, being able to be at 1.4 on the aperture, being able to be 8 inches away from his hand, and then having his face be maybe 24 inches away from his hand, it all works the same. It's all a proportion, right? It's not the distances, it's the ratio of how close you are to the subject and how far away the background is. So that's really important. And as you're, as you can look at this picture and see that his knuckles and like the ends of his fingers are in focus, but everything else, like the tape that he's actually putting on to his arm, the roll of tape that's in his hand itself, his hat, his face. Like if you didn't know who this was, you definitely wouldn't be able to tell, even though his whole face is in the picture, right? So this is kind of a extreme depth of field situation, and it's made possible by wide aperture, very close to the subject being further away from the background, right? Very similar kind of situation here. So this one is also 24 1.4. You can see the focus is on the rope here. It's also on his hand. It's on the rubber around his saddle horn there, but everything else, like his face is out of focus, his hat is out of focus because that's a few feet behind, like out of the plane of focus. This part of the horse, this part of the saddle is out of focus because that's closer than what we're focusing on, his hand, the rope, and the saddle horn. But then because the horse is angled a little bit, you have more in focus over here again because it's like the same distance here, right? It's just off kilter a little bit, but because I'm leaving his face out of focus, right? This isn't, even though I can tell who this is, it's not a picture about him. I'm telling the viewer he's not the most important thing here. The most important thing is the tools, the rope, the rubber, the saddle horn, the stitching in the saddle, all that kind of stuff. That's the most important part. And because I'm able to walk right up to this horse, like the saddle here is underneath the camera. That's how I'm close. That's how close I am in this situation. So that's how the depth of field works. A wide aperture, being able to get very close. This is another one. So this one also 24 1.4 will kind of zoom in here, like look at how her hand is completely in focus. You can see like the texture of her skin being lit up in the sun like that. You can't get any more in focus than that. But if we look right behind her, then you have this is all out of focus right here because different distances away, right? Her arm is one distance away, and then the horse is like another foot behind there, right? But also because of the angle that the horse is at, you have a little bit over here that's also in focus. So you can imagine if you were like had a measuring tape or something like that, everything over here plus her arm and the wrist of her shirt here, the same distance away, and then this part of the horse that's out of focus is further away, right? But this pops right off the page because of the light and the focus depth of field there. Another similar one here, you can tell that the focus is on the hand but not back here. You have the wrench, a little bit of this part of his hand, and then this part of the tape in his hand here, but then all of this stuff back here, all of this is out of focus. It just gives it that 3D kind of look that if you were shooting with an iPhone, or if you were shooting stop down, or if you were shooting 10 feet away or something like that, it just wouldn't look anywhere near as good. This one a little bit harder to see. This one is, I think this was 85. Yeah, 85, 1.4. So I'm a little bit further away and the distances aren't working as extreme as the other ones, but we can still see that her hand is in focus, this part of the rope, this part of the rope here, but then this is out of focus. All of this is out of focus. Her reins are out of focus, and the hat and her face and hair. This part of her arm is in focus. You can tell the difference between how this looks and how this looks, right? The cool thing about this picture is that I could have gotten closer and made her more out of focus, but this is kind of like a medium thing where if you know this is, you can still tell, but it's not, you're not focusing on her face. It's not about that. It's about the hand and the jewelry and the rope, with the twines going through there. So that's the important part of that picture. And then this one, this is 85, 1.4. This is behind a team roping run. I definitely did not mean to do this on purpose. I was shooting the roper coming out of the box and trying to contrast the roper with the rope against the really, really blue sky. But what happened here is like kind of a happy accident, I guess you would say, because the horse kicked up so much dirt in the air that it was enough to trick the autofocus sensor into focusing right here, which is really interesting. So you have like different depths of, you can see like there are pieces of dirt that are in focus, and there are pieces of dirt that are closer and pieces of dirt that are further away, and it gives it kind of that 3D kind of look. The roper is out of focus. The far side of the arena is out of focus. This is a mountain back here, and then the blue sky. So when you take the responsibility of sports photographers to isolate the action from the background, the important from the common, and then you think about how prominent the backgrounds are in most of what we shoot, it means that you have to do things to set up your shots differently. This isn't just go where the other people are shooting and shoot from there, because a lot of times they're just going for, can I get a picture? And you can stand 300 feet away from the shoots with the 70-200 and get pictures. They're just not going to be good pictures. They're not going to look interesting. So this picture that we're looking at here obviously is not one of mine. It's not even a photograph. This is a Van Gogh self-portrait. This is the one that's in the Art Institute of Chicago Museum. I pulled this one because I just saw this in person recently, and I can't even tell you how incredible it looks in person. The way that the colors kind of respond to each other. But that's not what this is about. I put this in here because I'm not allowed to do backgrounds like this. Like, I'm not allowed to color over what's in the background. This wasn't here. Like, he's looking at himself in the mirror or something like that. This isn't what the background looked like. He was able to paint all this in because Van Gogh is a painter, right? So this is the clothes that he was wearing. This is what his beard looked like. This is what his hair looked like, all of that kind of stuff. But the background is just something that he filled in so that it wasn't the background of his room or something like that. Studio photographers can do the same thing. They can put a backdrop in there. They can have no light hitting on the backdrop and it can just be completely dark. They can Photoshop things in and out if they want. But again, as sports photographers, primarily a journalism function, we operate under different rules. So we have to get it right at the time. There's no, oh, can you go back and do that over again? Right? I didn't get the right moment, or your eyes were closed or something like that. And we're also limited by real world factors like what the background looks like. So we're not able to make a picture that has a really bad background and then Photoshop it out later, or color over it, or crop it, the middle of the picture out or something. You just can't do those things. There's a expectation that what we're doing is real, that the picture that we're taking was actually athletes doing something and not a fabrication of all of that. So contrast what we're doing with painters. Think about like a caricature artist who can exaggerate if somebody has crazy haircut or a big nose or a prominent chin or something like that. They can take that to a certain extreme. Van Gogh can paint the background however he wants to make it look like it's moving. Studio photographers can set everything up they want to and Photoshop anything in and out and set up lights wherever they want to. We're just doing it differently. So you have to keep all that in mind. Taking the knowledge that you have, where is this thing going to happen? What am I going to be able to do to put myself in a position to get a good picture of this and a background that isn't annoying? These are all really, really important things. And the rest of the video, I'm going to kind of show you how I use all of this to plan my shoots and to get better backgrounds than most people do, to make my subjects stand out from the background and make my pictures things that people want to look at, not things that confuse people. This is a Google Earth view of the arena at Oakdale. Doesn't matter which arena that we're using, because everywhere that I go, I kind of use the same process. Depth of field isn't something that's incidental. It's not a byproduct of Aperture. It's really the foundation of how I plan a shoot. Where can I be? Where is the action going to be? How close can I get? Is there a way to get to safety from there? How far is the background going to be? Which way is the light going? And how can I take advantage of that? All of those things are really important. And what I'm trying to do is, for whatever lens that I think I'm going to be using, given distance and the size of what I'm shooting, I'm always looking to fill up the frame. I don't want to have to crop. Cropping is fine. But if you're going somewhere and you're cropping 400 pictures, that means you were using the wrong lens, right? You want to get into a situation where you can fill up the frame and not have to crop, make that subject jump out at you, right? So whatever lens I'm using, and maybe I'll be a little bit closer with an 85 1.4, I'll be a little bit further away with a 200 f2. I'll be even further away with 300 or 400 2.8. This all depends on the access, which lens I'm using, safety, things like that. So I'm looking for an angle where when the action comes into the sweet spot and is filling up the frame, the background is as far away as possible. And this is really kind of like a formula that you can use anywhere you go. You're just looking at the overhead view of the arena. You're figuring out, okay, the bucking shoots are over here. Where is going to be the best place to shoot the bucking action from? Well, I can tell you that I've been to this rodeo many times, and the PRCA photographers who shoot it stand here, 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 and here. This doesn't work because what we're talking about is this is like a 200-foot wide arena or something like that. You're shooting with the 70 to 200, and it's going to be 190 feet, and then it's going to be 10 feet. And you're not going to be able to get any kind of separation. The only thing you're going to be able to do is when the horses come out into the middle, but then the ride is basically over at that point, and it's still only halfway, right? You're still not putting yourself into a situation where you're going to be able to get really 3D kind of pictures. And we'll take a look at that. I've pulled a bunch of examples, but the idea is always the same. It doesn't matter where other people are setting up. It doesn't matter where you're going to be able to get like the safest kind of action, right? Because if you're right here, you're going to be able to get anything that comes out of here, right? But it's just not going to be the best version of that. And the same for the timed event stuff. If you were shooting like those guys shoot back here, when the team roping runs come here, they're still 150 and 150. So you're not, there's nowhere that these guys are setting up that's going to give them the best way to make the picture stand out, right? They just can't do it. They're not thinking about that. They're just trying to get pictures versus getting good pictures. To get good pictures, you have to take a risk. Well, what does that mean? So when I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, I'm definitely not going to shoot this way because I'm not going to get that kind of separation, but the action is still coming out of all these shoots. So I want to either be over here or over here and be shooting this way so that, you know, let's say this is 50 feet, but this is 125 feet or something like that, right? Where that, if the action happened right there, then I can fill up the frame, isolate the action, make the background really soft, and I don't have to worry about it. But the thing is that, let's say I'm over here and I'm shooting this way, and let's say a horse comes out of this chute gate and goes this way, I'm not getting a picture, right? But if I was over here and the horse did that and I'm shooting this way, I'm not getting a picture either, right? It's still not going to work. So I would rather make a strong choice, put myself into a situation where maybe it blows up right here and I'm 30 feet away or something, and the background is 100 feet away. That's the kind of situation that I'm trying to get into. And we'll take a look at how that influences my pictures later on. But the idea is that you should always be looking at this, you know, look at the map, look at the way that the light is going, and figure out how to get yourself into a situation where you're going to be able to get that separation, where you're not just shooting into a background that's going to be the same prominence as the subject. So let's take a look at some of the examples from Oakdale. This is kind of what the arena looks like. Here's more of like a side view. These are the bucking chutes right here, and this is the fence, right? And so this is 166 feet that arena is wide. So if you were just inside the fence here and you were shooting at things that were happening in the bucking chutes, you're right off the bat, you have to cover 166 feet worth of distance, and however far You're only subtracting however far the horse or the bull comes out of the bucking chute from that. So that ratio is going to be wrong every time. If you were shooting here, you would want the action to happen here, you know, 30 feet away, and you would want to have, whatever, 133 feet here, 136 feet here, right? To give you that impact and to fill the frame and have the background be really separated. But the action isn't going to happen there. It's just never going to happen there. So you have to think about, if you're standing here, what are those pictures that are here going to look like? And the good news is that I have one. And that's this, right? So this is 70 to 200 all the way out at 200. I'm at 2.8, and this action is happening 166 feet away from where I was. I know I was standing just inside the fence, and this action is happening inside the bucking chute. So, man, this is a really tough one because this is kind of a dramatic looking thing right here, right? The horse is rearing up. It's completely off of its feet. He's getting ready to hit his head on the bar above the bucking chutes. But the problem is that you have to ignore a whole lot, or you have to crop a whole lot to get to the interesting part of this picture, right? Because I'm too far away with too short a lens, and the background, you can read everything that's going on back there, right? And I'm not just talking about like this big sign right here. I can see that this says Wrangler. I can see that this says Express Ranches. Like all of that kind of stuff that I really don't want is the same distance away. And because of that, it's the same focus. You're not getting any separation. There's nothing in here that is saying this is the cool part of the picture. You would just have to know. And that is, I just don't like to be in situations like this. You just cannot make a good picture. It's just going to be two-dimensional. It's just not going to look good. And this is what most of the rodeo photographers do. So this is the cropped in version. This is the full frame of it. This is cropped in a little bit, but it's still, you just have too much, right? Too many, the ad boards, people in the background that you're able to recognize, just not enough separation, not enough excitement, nothing that's going to stop a scroll here. And you might be asking yourself, you knew what you were doing, right? When you were shooting in this kind of situation where it's 166 feet from the fence to the chute, what did you think was going to happen? Yeah, I knew exactly what was going to happen. The reason that I ended up shooting from this situation is that this was the first rodeo that I was able to shoot from the dirt. And I started out the bull riding doing what I would normally do. I was set up about right here, right, with the wall right here. And I'm thinking, whatever happens in the bull riding, even if I'm out to here, even if I'm out to here, whatever, I can still get back here and get over this wall fairly easily. The problem is that it's a concrete wall, and it's about, I don't know, 3.5 feet high or something like that, which means that in carrying 2 cameras and wearing jeans and boots or whatever, it's not as easy to jump up on there as I thought. And one of the first bulls that came out, did a little spin, threw off his rider, and went right to this corner, and then came all along this fence, and I just couldn't get out of the way. And I was just incredibly lucky that the bull didn't hit me, right? I was completely helpless. I couldn't get out of the arena, and I just turned my back and felt the bull kind of run behind me, right? So that was a really good lesson that I was unprepared there, right? This is what that looked like. You can see I'm kind of bent down here, but this wall over here is just too high for me to get out of here, right? This is like, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 feet away from me or something like that. and this wall right here is like 3.5 feet high, and I just could not get up here in the time that it took the bull to come here. And I just got really lucky that it didn't hit me. So I didn't want to be in the same situation again. I didn't want to be in the same situation for a bull ride or a bronc ride or whatever. So for the rest of that perf, because I knew I couldn't get out of the arena safely from this side, the rest of that perf I did shoot from 166 feet away, right? Because instead of being over here and shooting this way, but not being able to get out of the arena and taking a chance there, I decided, okay, I'm going to go all the way back here. There's plenty of time. If a bull or a horse or something like that comes at me, I can get to the fence and, be safer. After this perf, I went to a hardware store and I got myself a little ladder, a little mini ladder that was tall enough for me to get out of here. And it was a really good decision because the same bull was out the next day and it did exactly the same thing. And only because I had that little ladder that was right here was I able to get up here, and then the bull just came right by me, right? Otherwise, I would have been dead. So that's why I was shooting opposite of the bucking shoots. I very rarely do this. I never do this from this far away, certainly. Again, this is the cropped version and I still don't like it very much, right? But this is why, because I was unprepared for that day. I fixed it that night and was able to get back to shooting more or less from here. So I want to show you what the difference is. Like, this is the worst possible thing where I'm 166 feet away and the background is right there. This next one is going to be from the workshop that I just did in Texas. This is a different arena, obviously. They were bucking out of this chute right here, and the broncs were kind of coming this way. There is the next picture that we're going to look at. I was like 4 feet away from the horse that was coming out, and as you can see, like, it's very, very far from this angle and this direction. The background is far enough away that it's not going to matter at all. And so we're going to look at the difference between this picture, too far away, no separation, and then we'll look at this one where the horse is 4-5 feet away from me or something like that, and the background is 60, 70, 80 feet away. This is more impactful. People are going to want to look at this picture 100 times out of 100 rather than looking at this one. This doesn't have the kind of impact. Too far away, too prominent of a background. And then we look at this where the bronc is right, it's like almost the minimum focusing distance from where I was, and the background's really far away. So this isn't safe. I'm not recommending that you go and get this close, but the principle of it is really important. You want to be closer to your subject than the subject is to the background. That's what gives you separation. That's what makes the background look less important than the subject, which is what we're trying to do. You don't have to know anything about anything, really, sports, rodeo, horses, or whatever, to know that just by looking at this picture, that this is the important part of the picture, and that all of this kind of stuff right here is take it or leave it, right? You just don't need any of this because the most important thing is here. Whereas if we're looking at this picture, right, it's there's how many people? 4, 8, 9 people or whatever in the picture, other than the cowboy who's riding. You have all these signs that are as big as the horse is. It doesn't work. But if you look at this one, this makes much more sense, and it's immediately clear what's happening here. Now we go back to here. This is after I had a stool, right? So I can get to the wall and get out of the arena, no problem. And if these horses and bulls come out of these chutes and come around here, I'm going to be 50 feet away. So whether that's with an 85 or a 70-200 or a 200 F2 or something like that, they're mostly going to be coming into the sweet spot of where I am. Because I'm 50 feet away, and because this is 150 feet away, here I'm good on filling the frame and depth of field. That's obviously what I'm trying to do. So here's how far away the background looks, right? 50 feet to the subject and another 200 feet to the wall. This is what that ends up looking like here. So this isn't a very shallow depth of field kind of picture. Um, 70 to 250 something feet away at 2.8. So yeah, you can definitely tell this is where the subject is. You have really strong lines around here. This is completely in focus, and you can see the background is kind of not in focus, but still in focus enough that you can tell that they're ad boards. You can read Oakdale Saddle Club there. You can see who the bullfighter is. You can see these guys are kind of out of focus and faded out in the background. But what I did was I changed the distances involved because I knew that the bull was going to come out a certain amount from the chutes. So I went out a certain amount from the chutes and I chose an angle where he was getting the light and where the background was going to be furthest away. So I was able to make a more impactful picture because I took into account all of those different things. This is another one from the side. This is from outside the arena, and this was even closer. As you can tell, you can't even see the background because I was completely filling up the frame with where I was shooting through the fence. Pictures like this are just going to be more impactful no matter what, because you filled up the frame, you have like the grain of the leather, you have the individual pieces of the fringe. You can see his wedding band there, but even here, right, which isn't all that far away, you can already see that this is getting out of focus right here. So this is what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to change the distances involved. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm shooting very far away and the background is right there because everything's going to look two-dimensional. What I am looking for is things like this that are three-dimensional, and that comes from being close to the subject and letting the background be as far away as it possibly can. And that just doesn't happen, right? You have to plan. It's going to be a different position for different events, for different rodeos. And it's up to you to figure out how to fill the frame and how to have separation from the subject to the background. This is a Google Earth view of the arena at Clovis. As you can see, this one is kind of similarly shaped to the one at Oakdale, but it's definitely narrower by about 50 feet, right? The problem at Clovis, especially for me, the first couple of years that I shot it, I didn't have my PRCA card. I wasn't allowed in the dirt. So there's not really a good kind of official shooting position. This is in the dirt. This is like, I don't know, 10 rows back in the stands and also higher significantly than the dirt, right? And this is where they put you if you're not allowed into the dirt. So in addition to being too far away for a 70-200, but too close for the longer lenses, it's also higher up, and it just makes it a really bad kind of angle to be shooting from. So we'll take a look at how that affects the pictures in a second. This is like a side view. You can see this is like a good way to see where the official kind of shooting position. This is like 15 feet above dirt level, right? So instead of shooting dirt level to dirt level, you're shooting high down there. So you're further away and you have a less kind of interesting angle. Really bad. And I definitely did not shoot from there very much at all. Just another kind of angled view. This is what it looks like from that official kind of shooting position. You don't want these lines. Like anytime you're shooting from elevated, you either want to be directly above or you want to be shooting down so that the dirt or the floor or the ice or whatever you're shooting is the only background. The last thing that you want to do is be shooting from kind of like a mid elevated kind of position and then the action happens here, and you have part of the building and part of the under the chutes and part of the chutes themselves and then part of the dirt, right? It just looks really, really bad. So this was with a 400 kind of from that official spot. So I'm filling the frame at 400, but there's no separation because he's still in the chute when I was making this. And two more jumps, and it's too close to me at this point. It also has that higher kind of look. So you have just bad lines. It's just a bad perspective. This is what it looks like from the seats. You don't want to make pictures that looks like they're from the seats. This is with the 70 to 200 from that elevated position. As you can see, you're completely above the horse at this point, and that's what brings in all these lines back here that I don't want. I've separated him because I waited until he got halfway across the arena, but it's still only 50-50. Like, maybe this is like, I don't know, 60 yards, or I'm sorry, 60 feet to him and then 60 feet from him to the background or something. So there's separation, but it's not very good. It's certainly not a special picture that you want to sit around and look at very often, because you don't have the separation and because the angle is too high from here. This is 70 to 200, but from the dirt this time. So you can kind of see how you're at a slightly higher angle here. And on this one, I'm below the bull, like looking up at the bull rider's face, whereas this one I'm looking down on the bronc rider's face. So this is slightly better. He's a little bit, there's a little bit of separation there, but still not anywhere near what I would like. This is just, the first year that I was shooting in the dirt and still kind of trying to get used to it. So I crept up a little bit to try to equalize the distance, but it's still, you can see those guys in the background are every bit as in focus as the bull and the rider. And it's just not, again, not what I'm trying to do. It doesn't give me a good chance to make a super impactful kind of picture. So one of the ways that I solved this was by shooting up top. This is a new announcer stand and VIP area up here. It used to be covering up the chute so that if you were on the edge of this building right here, you were right over the chutes. So I would go up on top of the building and shoot down all the time. They made this bigger building and they moved it back, and it's not as good of an angle, so I haven't been back up there. But one of the ways that I got over the not being able to be in the dirt was going up on top and shooting straight down so that the background was completely just dirt, right? I didn't have to worry about ad boards or fences or anything like that, because shooting from the top of a building down onto the dirt is the only background. Not a whole lot of places where you can do this, but this is one of the situations where depth of field doesn't matter all that much, because much like having just like a white background in a studio or a sky, the depth of field isn't going to matter, because it's either going to be slightly out of focus dirt, like here. This one is a higher aperture, so this one is f4 and this one is 2.8, so you can kind of tell the dirt is a little bit more out of focus in this one and more in focus in this one. But again, just using the dirt as a background and not having to worry about making the background soft or anything like that, because it's already not going to be very distracting because it's just consistent dirt. Same one on this one stopped down a little bit so you can see the details in the dirt on this one. The details in the dirt on this one are a little bit more prominent than the details in the dirt on this one, but it's all the same because I'm shooting from high down onto the dirt. Don't have to worry about the awkward lines. Don't have to worry about bad backgrounds. So this is a good choice if you can get it. This is barrel racing from the top. Same principle here, just a little bit more predictable because you know that they're going to be going around that barrel. But I'm using the light here to show the muscles and the texture of the horse's skin and fur. So kind of interesting there. This one is a little bit different. So we'll go back to the map. Barrel is going to be right here. There's going to be another barrel like right here. And then the other barrel is like right here. This picture was made from this gate. So I didn't want to be along the fence right here because it's not safe. This barrel is too close to the wall and I don't want to get run over, but I can be the same exact distance away shooting underneath this fence and be relatively safe, right? Because even if the horse runs into the gate, I'm not going to get run over. As you can see, this is, I don't know, 15 feet or something like that from where I'm shooting to that barrel, and then 150 feet from the barrel to the background. This is purely a situation where I'm trying to figure out how close can I safely get to the action? How can I fill up the frame? How can I put the background as far away as possible? This satisfies every single one of those things. You have enough depth of field here. I'm shooting at f5 on this one, right? So you can see the whole horse is completely in focus. The whole rider is completely in focus. You have a lot of the dirt that's flying up in the air in focus. The barrel is in focus, but that's pretty much it because the background is so far away that it's just soft by the time it gets back there, right? You can't read anybody's t-shirts. You can't notice anybody back there because they're very small, because they're far away, and they're out of focus because they're far away. This is a little bit different. So this one, instead of being made with the 70-200, this was 400-8. This is not kind of a situation that I would shoot in all that much, but here's kind of what that would look like. So I made this from this corner down here because the sun was kind of coming like this and setting. So I wanted to shoot across the sunlight like that, right? So this was, again, before I was allowed in the dirt. So I'm outside the arena shooting underneath the fence, and he's coming out of one of these shoots and coming kind of out like this. So I'm here 400-8. He comes out of here and kind of comes straight like this, and I'm catching him here. Even though this is probably like 150 feet and this is probably like 50 feet or something like that, with the 400 2.8, I'm able to do okay here. Like, this isn't the best kind of version of this. You can still see like the Pepsi back here, the TV news station there, and then another sponsor here, but the background is soft enough, right? It's not killing it, and I have enough pop here, right? He is separated just enough from the background. It's not ideal, but from this situation before I was able to get into the arena, when the official position wasn't right for a 70-200, I found a position that worked for a 400, right? And sometimes you just have to do that because there's nothing else you can do. This is from all the way on top of the stands. You can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So this is like a walkway up top, like you can shoot from all the way up here. So I'm shooting with a 400 down like this, and the rider and the horse are well within range. And because I let them get away from the chutes back here, then all of the background is just the dirt. Again, this is 402.8 at f4 to give me all of the horse and the rider in focus, right? That's why f4 on that one. And because the background was always going to be dirt anyway, it didn't matter that it was at f4. And then these last two from Clovis, this is from inside the dirt and from the side where I'm, able to do what I want to do, right? So on this one, let's say, maybe I'm shooting from right here. This bull is coming out here. So I'm shooting across. Let's say this is, I don't know, 50 feet. And then, the angle that I'm getting, this is pretty far away. So this is like 75 feet or something like that, which is enough. With 200 f2, I can get the kind of depth of field that I want here. Both the cowboy and the bull are completely in focus, and everything that's not the cowboy and bull are soft, out of focus. This is what happens when you can choose exactly where you want to be, and when the subject comes directly into the situation that you wanted them to. This is kind of the same here. This is 200 f2, again at f2, and this is like the end of a bronc ride coming in to like the minimum focusing distance. Is probably only like 20 feet away or something. As you can see here, because I'm only 20 feet away from the horse and the horse is 150 feet away from the background, there's no problem whatsoever isolating and separating the subject from the background. You can see how soft all of this is. There's no chance of being able to recognize anything that's going back there, but you have like the really nice details here because I was so close to the horse. You can see like the individual hairs here, the fibers coming off of the bronc rein, the stitching and his shaps and the fringe, all that kind of stuff. So this is why it's really important to choose the angles and the backgrounds and to safely get as close to what you're shooting as possible. Really important to do that. In preparation for this video, I went through my entire rodeo archive, right? It's like 180,000 total pictures that I've kept. And this is what it looks like if you look at them by aperture. From f1.4 to 1.9, that's 11.85. So almost 12% of my pictures have been taken wider than f2. That's pretty wide. And then from 2 to 2.8, another 18.5%. So when you add those two together, that's 30% that's wider than 2.8. That's showing you that I'm definitely shooting wide open or pretty close to wide open a lot of the time. When people are sending in pictures for their critiques, a lot of these pictures are made at like f6.3 or f8 or something like that. And you can look on here, like just look at the bottom where every picture that I've made that's been at over f5 is only 5% of the pictures that I've taken. I just don't shoot those apertures very often, right? The reason is because it's easier to get that good depth of field, lower apertures. It makes complete sense that 80% of my pictures have been taken wider than f4. If you're shooting and you're higher than f4, you want to think about it because you're probably leaving in too much of the background. You might be shooting with gear that's not up to the task. Like you can't make an f4 lens do 2.8, but you can make a 2.8 lens do f4, right? And that's the really important thing, is that the wider aperture lenses are going to be more expensive, but they're going to let in more light and they're going to give you that more creative control because you can go to those wide apertures to blur out the background and give you that good separation. Yeah, it's expensive, right? I have 3 lenses that are like wide aperture lenses, like, you know, wider than normal, right? 24 1.4, 50 1.4, 85 1.4, and 200 f2. And I use these lenses a lot because it lets in the light, because it gives me that control to be able to blur out the background. And you just need those pictures, those lenses to make those pictures, right? It doesn't work any other way. If I'm shooting above f4 or something like that, there's going to be a really good reason for it. I pulled some pictures that we can take a look at for that, because I want you thinking about shooting at the widest aperture that you can to still have enough depth of field. You don't want to go the other way. You're not trying to shoot at a narrow aperture so that you can put everything in focus, because the pictures just won't look quite as good. This set of pictures right here are all among the 5% of pictures that I've made that are f5 and higher. And as we walk through them, I'm going to show you the settings, and then we'll talk about the reason that I was stopped down more than all of my other pictures. This one is made with my 16mm 2.8 fisheye, and the aperture that I was using here was 5.6. And so a couple things about this picture. When I am shooting my fisheye in a situation like this, it's on the end of a monopod, so I'm reaching it out into the arena as far as I possibly can. This was from before I had my card when I wasn't allowed into the dirt. So this was kind of a workaround that I used to get out there. So I'm holding the end of a monopod, and at the other end of the monopod is my camera and a fisheye, and I have a little clicker remote control in my hand that is making the picture. So I'm not actually even looking through the viewfinder when I'm making this, just guessing at this point. I know what the field of view is on the 16 millimeter fisheye, and it's just at that point in time, just try to put it as close to where I need it as possible, and then push the button on the remote and hope that you get something. The reason that this is stopped down to 5.6 is that I don't know where exactly this horse is going to come out of the chute, and I don't know how close or far away it's going to be from me at that point in time, and I don't have a finger on the focus button, even if I could see, because I'm holding the camera out over the chutes and into the arena. So 5.6 on a 16 millimeter lens is going to give me a really, really wide depth of field, right? A lot of things are going to be in focus because it's a really short lens and I'm stopped down pretty significantly. So if that horse goes a couple feet to the right or a couple feet to the left or higher or lower, it's still going to be more or less in focus. So that's one of the reasons why I would stop down. This one is not made with the fisheye. This is the 14 to 24, but I'm laying on the ground. I'm shooting underneath a very low fence and I can barely see what's happening here. And even though I have my finger on the actual shutter button and I have my thumb on the back button focus, look at how much further away the bull's face is. Like, that's pretty close to me. But then, like, we're going back on the bull and then further away even to get to the face of the cowboy. So I need more depth of field. I don't want just the bull in focus. I want to be able to see who the cowboy is, right? I want to be able to read what kind of glove he's wearing, that kind of thing. So stopping down in a situation like this where I'm shooting at 14 millimeters and I'm at 5.6, that's going to give me a lot of depth of field here. The whole bull and the whole rider are all in focus. And then even in the background, you can see Core's barrel, you can see the clown. You can't see people's faces back here, but you can make out individual bodies. So there's a lot of depth there that puts more things in focus than I would have been able to if I had been wide open at 2.8 or something. So again, it's unpredictable, and when I can't make changes and when I am in a situation where I know that two things that I'm going to be shooting are going to be pretty far away from each other, relatively speaking, then stopping down is what I'm doing. This one, kind of a unique picture. I'm shooting from a little footbridge as the cowboy here is herding these bulls down from the pens to the arena. I knew that the distance from this bull's face to his face, this is like 30 feet or something like that. So I needed to stop down because I didn't want to have like this bull in focus and then these bulls falling off and then him out of focus, or to have him in focus and then have all of this be out of focus. I wanted, this is certainly much more of like a landscape type picture, and I wanted all of the important parts of it, right, to be in focus. So the horses up here, the cowboy, these bulls, these other bulls up here. I'm not wild about how all this looks, but that's just part of it, right? And when you stop down, that's going to be, the ground there is going to be more in focus than you would like, but that's like the trade-off that you make here. So this was at 40 millimeters and 5.6. So you can see there's, this is very flat. There's like not any kind of separation here at all. Portraits. So when you're using really bright lights here, you can see the reflections of the lights in his eyes. When you do that and you have the light very close to the subject and the camera's very close to the subject, you need to stop down just to keep the light from overpowering everything. So that's why this portrait is at 5.6. So stop down a little bit, you get the sharpness and the good details in the kind of like the weathered skin, but then you're also stopping down to keep the flash from like really blinding the exposure. This is another reason that I stopped down just purely for exposure. Like this is a silhouette, so depth of field isn't quite as important, but I'm stopped down all the way to f9 because I'm shooting directly into the sun here. Like this this is the sun. So I'm shooting right into it, and I'm stopping down because I want as little light coming in as possible, right? I want this to go completely black. There's no light hitting them. So I'm stopping down to keep the exposure down so that like the sign and all the cowboys are going into silhouette. And that's one of the reasons why you would stop down, is to make a very bright picture look darker because you're letting less and less light in. This is a situation where I stopped down for depth of field. I wasn't trying to get everything in focus. So this is 24 1.4 at 6.3. So definitely one of the more stop down pictures in my archive. The reason that I'm doing that is, so look how close I am to him. Just a matter of, I don't know, 18 inches or something like that from where his face is. These people holding this big flag. I didn't want this to be mush. I wanted you to be able to tell that it was people holding a flag, but I also didn't want it to be completely in focus either. So 6.3 is like a compromise in that way, because I have him at 18 inches away and this at maybe 40 feet away or 50 feet away or something like that. So it's a little bit more out of focus. And then you have the grandstand that's even more out of focus there. So if I had made this picture, let's say at 1.4, then he would have looked exactly the same. Like this would have been completely in focus, but this would all have been mush because it's so far away. So I stopped down, not to put it in focus, but to make it a little bit more recognizable so that you could tell that it was a rodeo in the background, that was volunteers holding a flag. So the last part of this video I wanted to talk about is zooms versus primes and access versus limits. So most of the people that are watching this are rodeo photographers. Some of you also, or primarily, shoot sports. I shoot both. The idea is that when I go to a hockey game, they're saying you're sitting here, you're shooting through this hole, and that's it, right? So it's critical for me to have a 24 to 70 and a 70 to 200, or a 14 to 24 and a 70 to 200, something like that. Both of those lenses will fit through the hole that I'm allowed to shoot through. And between the two lenses, I'm able to get from the boards to halfway or something, right? That's the best I can do because I can't be on the ice. There's glass all the way around, so I can't pick where exactly I'm shooting from. They say, go here and do this. When I'm shooting football and I have to be 30 yards away from the action or something like that, a zoom is handy there because sometimes it could come closer, but most of the time it's going to be further away. The reason that I like shooting rodeo, and the reason why rodeo is different than other things, is that you can be anywhere, right? So let's say there's team roping that's happening here, and most of the runs are going to come this way, right? Nobody is telling me, oh, you need to be here and you can't move, right? So the only thing that you can do is shoot a 400 this way, because by the time they get here, you're shooting their backs. The idea with rodeo is that you can be anywhere. You're making a choice between what lens you want, where you want to be, and you can use a zoom or you can use a prime. But the thing is that most primes are going to be faster aperture and give you the ability to blur out the background more and isolate the subject more, right? So I like using primes because in rodeo, I can say, well, I could be here with a 200 f2, or I can be here within 85 1.4. And because the action is coming here, I'm going to be able to have a good shot either way. There's a rodeo photographer, I'm not going to get too deeply into this, who said that his favorite lens to use for shooting rodeo is a 200 to 400 f4. And the idea is that he can just get a picture of everything and he doesn't have to be very close because it's a long lens. To me, that's just super lazy. You can be here and you can shoot calf roping, you can shoot team roping, you can shoot barrel racing, and you can shoot all the rough stock events because you're standing here and you're able to zoom in and out. But the thing is that you're not giving yourself the benefit of the best part about rodeo is being able to move around and shoot from exactly where you want to. Getting it right in the camera, getting the right lens, getting the right depth of field is always going to be better than being really far away and zooming in and out with a lens that's f4. It's not going to be able to give you that separation. You're just literally not doing your job as a rodeo photographer, as a sports photographer, as an action photographer, if you're just standing as far back as you can and trying to get everything. You just can't do it like that, right? There are always going to be times where you have to play it safe. If you're like on an assignment and you need a certain picture of a certain team or something like that, yes, you are going to have to play it a little bit safer. You might have to move back a little bit. You have to use a wider lens. You have to stop down a little bit to give yourself a little bit more of a chance to get everything in focus, of course. But the main part of it, the reason why rodeo photography is so cool is that you can move around. You can choose the foreground. You can choose the background. You can equalize your distances so that you're closer to what you're shooting than it is to the background. And playing it safe is just going to result in average pictures, and informed choices and really strong execution are where good pictures come from. And those two things are on different paths. You don't make great pictures from trying to make average pictures and then getting lucky. It just doesn't work like that. Sometimes you have to be really, really fearless and just go out there and say, I'm either going to get a great picture or I'm going to get nothing. That's where great pictures come from. Hopefully this video gives you a really good idea as to how I think about depth of field and aperture and how I use all of that to plan my shoots. I don't like leaving things up to chance. There's always going to be random things that happen, things that you weren't prepared for, things that don't go the way they were supposed to go. Your planning can be flushed down the toilet, but the more planning you do, the more you think about this kind of stuff, the more you use the right gear for what you're trying to do, the better pictures you're going to get. I really hope that this video showed you how I think about all this kind of stuff, because all of this thinking can be applied to your own photography. And the more you think and the more you plan, the better pictures you'll get. So this has been the aperture part of the series on the exposure triangle. If you have any questions, if any of this didn't make any sense, or if you want me to expand on any of this, please give me some feedback. This has been Matt Cohen for Matt Cohen Photo Workshops. Thanks for watching.